I'm thinking of ending things, the 2016 novel by Ian Reid. I'm not sure how I missed this one. It won NPR's Best Book of the Year award that year and was eventually made into a film, which is how I discovered it, by Charlie Kaufman, which just recently released on Netflix. And I did a review for it, so if you'd like to check that out, check this card right here. Now, I don't always read the novels of books that I've seen, but this one I did enjoy it. But that's not really why I chose to read the novel. Why I chose to read the novel was when I went to Wikipedia to read about the novel, it classified it as a horror slash psychological thriller. And then when I checked the listing on Amazon, it said the same thing. And if you've watched the movie, you'll know that that is not indicative at all of the film. So I had to find out if this truly was a thriller in its original form, and how and why did Charlie Kaufman manipulate it to what I saw on Netflix. And I'm going to begin by saying this novel and this film are a great example of setting your expectations and how marketing can destroy something. So, really quickly, when I looked at the reviews on Amazon to see what people thought about the novel, I noticed that it had an overall good rating. I think it was an average of 4 stars. But the very first few reviews I look at are all 1 star. And that is what I will talk about later. How marketing can do terrible, terrible things to an amazing book. All right, so what is this thing about? What's the hook? Well, just like the movie, if you have seen it, if you haven't, we are introduced to our narrator, a young woman who is unnamed, and she's been dating her boyfriend Jake of about 6 or so weeks, and she's contemplating breaking up with him. And just like the film, the novel begins with that very line, I'm thinking of ending things. And what happens next is a long car ride where they are going to visit his parents for the first time. And in that car ride, we get to know these two characters very, very well. There's deep conversations. And I'm sure if you've ever been on a long car ride with anyone, you'll know what happens when two people are isolated with each other for a long period of time. Jake, we learn, is a very smart man. He's quirky. He embodies kind of what you'd expect, someone who is a little socially awkward, but very intelligent, which I think is a very common combination. You rarely get someone who is a social butterfly and very intelligent and insightful. So our characters, they talk about art, philosophy, science, a variety of topics, which I did find a little bit more interesting than the film, which is more geared toward the arts or theater. But anyway, so they continue their journey and finally arrive at the parents' house. And that's when things start to get strange. And from there, they get stranger and stranger and stranger until the finale of the book. So, what did I think? Well, this book is difficult to talk about without giving away spoilers, but I will do my best. Let's start with character. The vast majority of the novel, we are with our narrator and Jake, and we're learning about them very, very deeply. We get an intimate view at their relationship, the idiosyncrasies of Jake and his habits and his quirks. And really what I loved about it is our narrator is analyzing him under a microscope, which felt very, very familiar. I mean, if you've ever been in a relationship or a long-term relationship or even just meeting someone for the first time, you'll know that in the beginning of that, you're kind of looking at them and observing them and asking yourself constantly, can I be with this person for a very long time? And that's obviously a difficult question to answer because you never truly know. And so you're trying to either bring them up by all the positive things or slowly chip your perception of them away to convince yourself that it's probably not going to work out. And that's what really the narrator is doing here. She's playing with all of these ideas. And on one hand, she is talking about why they might work out. And then on the other hand, why it's probably best just to end it now before things get too deep. And all of this is done through conversation and internal monologues. We have them in these deep conversations where Jake reveals his own character, and that's only later internalized by our narrator, who expands upon it and gives us more insight into what he's talking about and what her thoughts are on it. The character work here is vivid and realistic, and I really enjoyed that the author focused on the small, seemingly insignificant things that everyone thinks about, so it's highly relatable. All right, let's talk about the plot and the narrative. So it's a very simple narrative. I mean, we have these two characters going to visit parents. There's only a handful of locations in the book, and I can't stress enough that this is a very internal plot. And what I mean by that is the story rests on the shoulders of the characters and less about their actions and the locations they go to. But I have to say, I was never bored a moment in this book. It just kept me going, it kept me interested, and I enjoyed how the narrative developed over time, how things slowly started to reveal themselves in a very clever way. And what I mean by that, it's kind of like when you read a line and then you have to go back and read a line because you thought you misread it. And those are the things that you did read correctly, and they start to reveal more about the characters and the plot. Now, if you've seen the movie, this is very different tonally. Okay, so as it was classified as a psychological thriller and a horror novel, it definitely fits more into that category. Whereas the movie was much more of a light-hearted narrative. It was quirky, it was a little zany. It took the subject matter very differently. So the novel and the film essentially end the same way. It's just I felt like the tone was very different. And I think that's probably as much as I should say about the plot. Just know that this, if you're into books that get deep inside of a character's head and you're less concerned about an intricate plot, then you'll be happy with this, and you'll definitely know what to expect. All right, let's talk about the writing itself, or as I like to call it, the cinematography of a novel or the soundscape of a novel, the soundtrack. This novel is told in first person, and so thereby we get a very intimate look at the characters and the inner thoughts of everyone, and it's less descriptive and more introspective. And so the bulk of the novel is dialogue and monologue, and the beauty there, and really one of the reasons why I really respect the first person tense, even though I don't write in it very often, is the ability to get in someone's head and make everything just feel conversational, which I think if we read things that are conversational and less prosy, it tends to just flow better. We don't get caught up with trying to find the perfect word to describe something, or get lost in the maze of purple prose. And so I think that while this novel is written beautifully, it is written plainly at the same time. And I think that's really the goal of any writer, is to make something that is succinct and interesting, but easy to read and easy to understand and just completely accessible, but also has a music of its own. And one special thing I'd like to talk about is there's a format in this novel, and it kind of reveals what happened or what may have happened at the end of the novel. So in between every chapter, or I should say maybe is at the end of every chapter, is a small aside of a dialogue of these people that have witnessed an event and they're talking about somebody. And I'm not sure if I would have understood it if I hadn't seen the movie already, but once again, my biggest regret. So what it is it's like a little carrot or a treat at the end of the chapter that just keeps pulling you along. It gives you a little bit of something that just makes you hungrier for more, and I really like that format. And then, as I said, this novel is a mystery of sorts. Things aren't what they seem to be, and the way the author does this is just masterful. I mean, he teases it out. There's changes. Man, this is really hard to talk about without spoiling it. But just trust me that he does it in a very interesting way that makes you understand what's happening. It doesn't feel like a slap in the face. It doesn't feel like everything's gone 180 on you. It really works, and it's a slow burn that culminates into a raging fire, let's say. This novel is deep and very readable, and I thoroughly enjoyed just the line-by-line work. The one last thing I'd like to say is I've spoken to people like this, and maybe you have too, where they only read nonfiction because they think there is no value in fiction. And this is one of those books that proves them wrong. So if you do have a friend like that, or a family member, or somebody you know who balks the idea of reading fiction, then tell them to read this book. I think it's a great example of how fiction can have you learn about a subject and learn about people and think about your own life that nonfiction just can't touch, because you're not learning it through information, you're learning it through emotion, which is a much more powerful method. Should you read it? Well, I'm going to take this in two different directions. One, if you've seen the movie, and one if you haven't seen the movie. So let's start with if you've seen the movie first. If you've seen the movie first, please understand, keep your expectations set. This is not the movie. Now, if you look at it in black and white, it is very similar to the movie and all of the major beats, but tonally it is very, very different. This is a much darker take. This is a much more serious take, and one that I think is vastly more powerful than what I saw in the film. Now, I did like the film for what it was, and I appreciated what Charlie Kaufman did with it. He made it his own. But I have to say my one regret is that I didn't read the novel first. But I mean, I think I'd be in the same situation. Whereas if I read the novel, I'd have certain expectations and then see the movie and be disappointed slightly. I think you know that adaptations can differ from the source material quite a bit. And I think the best example of an adaptation like this would be the movie Annihilation by Alex Garland. So I read the novel by Jeff Vandermeer, and Alex Garland stated this many times. He wanted to make this his own. It is not a page by page adaptation of what Jeff Vandermeer did. It's its own thing within itself. It's inspired by it rather than adapted from it, I guess you could say. But it still retained the heart of what it was. So if you've seen that movie and read that book, I think you'll know what I'm talking about. If you haven't seen the movie, I definitely think you should read this book. Just know, as I said, set your expectations. This is a novel that starts out one way and ends another. This isn't by any means a straightforward thriller or a psychological horror novel. What appears to be on the surface is really not where you get to at the end. Sorry, it's really hard for me to talk about this without spoiling it. Just know that things are not really what they seem to be. And there are a lot of elements in this novel that do have thriller aspects. I could see that if I didn't know what was going to happen from seeing the movie, I would get a very creeped out vibe from the whole thing. And there's a heavy mystery throughout it that I could only imagine how compelling would be if I didn't know where it was going to go. Just don't think this is a straightforward thriller. This is heavily character driven. And just look at the subtext, look at it as metaphor, and I can promise you that you will really love this novel. If you couldn't tell, I love this novel. It's one of my favorites I've read in a long time, which means I'm thinking of ending things by Ian Reid a 9 out of 10. If you watched my review of Paul Tremblay's novel, Survivor's Song, you'll know that I did say that some of the best books are the ones that you think about for days, weeks, months, even years after you finish the last page. This is going to be one of those novels for me. The author did something unique here. He did something special, and he fully deserves all of the awards he's won. And this book is just a really great example of the power of fiction and what it can achieve as a medium and how it can make you feel and understand others and even yourself. So I highly recommend it. If you've seen the movie, if you haven't seen the movie, just understand the points I've made here if you come from either camp. Set your expectations, read the Amazon reviews and why people hated it. And if you'd like to see me create and not just critique, check out my series Worth 1,000 Words, where I write a 1,000 word short story based on a piece of artwork without an outline every week. I think you might enjoy it if you're into storytelling or writing. Thank you, Ian Reid, for giving us and contributing to the world of fiction and literature, something that is truly special. And thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye. All right, well, if you're still here, you must be someone interested in the spoiler talk about the comparison of the movie and the novel, what I thought about it, what I liked about it, what I didn't, without being vague like I was in the review. So I did mention the tone. So I love darker stories. I'm totally drawn to them, and this book just hit me at every level. It was deep. It was enthralling. It was a tragic, tragic story that I loved. And I can only imagine if the movie had been adapted very much like the novel had been written, I feel like this would be a cult classic or one of those films that we would just remember for a very long time for what it did. And I don't want to belittle the Charlie Kaufman version. I did enjoy it. I had my issues with it, but I think that I do like the idea of someone taking something and putting their mark on it rather than adapting it like a photocopy. And one thing I really appreciated more in the novel was the fact that the dialogue between the two. Now, if you've seen the movie, then you'll know that a lot of the dialogue was heavily influenced by art or theatrics. I mean, there was a musical bit at the very end, so you could see there that Charlie Kaufman was putting his own unique filter on it. But I didn't really get the same feeling from the film. Yes, it technically ends the same in kind of a metaphorical way. You have to sort of stretch your mind a little bit and look at the imagery and come to your conclusion as to what happens. Where, as in the book, it's very literal. We have these sections between the chapters that reveal that some character, we don't really know who yet at this point, has died or committed suicide. And the thing that really blew me away was at the very end when you realize everything you just read was this journal entry or this manuscript that Jake wrote about himself. And that was really just the cherry on top. I mean, the whole book I enjoyed and I enjoyed how it ended, but then that last page really made it something special and unique. And I think what really reminded me of it is Handmaid's Tale. And if you've read The Handmaid's Tale, you'll know that, and hopefully I'm not spoiling it. It's from like the 80s, so I'm sorry if if this is a spoiler. But we do learn at the end of the novel that what we read was the journal of this woman who experienced these things. And so while technically that's the same thing as this novel, the differentiating factor here is that this our narrator never existed, or well, I should say she was Jake, and almost examining. She was like a phantom girlfriend and an example of all of the what ifs, all of the could have beens. And you just go back and you think about, Jake driving alone in his car and meeting his parents and all these things just alone, alone, alone. And these hypothetical situations of this girl meeting his parents and what may or may not happen in the future. It just really makes you go back and think about everything and reconsider stuff and to a degree make you want to go back and read the novel from the beginning again just to see if you can pick up those little details. And I think that the way the author did it, where he's slowly giving you hints over time to the fact that this is Jake and this girl is Jake and they're one and the same, and changing the pronouns, and it's a great example of how to slowly tease something out over time. And I was just really into it. I loved it when I finished it. There were no slow parts, there were no eye rolling parts. It just all around was a great book. All right, I'll try to keep this relatively short. I'm not going to go on and on and on. So if you have any thoughts, please put them in the comments below. If you have any book recommendations, please put them in the comments below. And thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed what I had to say. And hopefully, if you're still here, I didn't completely spoil it for you, and you saw the time code note, and you heard what I said before all this. So anyway, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.